Hello, thank you for joining me for the verse of the day. My name is Pastor David Prenga. I'm with Brewster Baptist Church, and I get to share with you the verse of the day this entire week since Pastor Doug is gone away. And this week our verses will reflect on the theme called the Temple of God. And if you haven't watched the sermon from Sunday, go to our website at brewsterbaptistchurch.org, click on messages, and watch it, and let me know what you think of it. Well, today's verse is from 1 Corinthians 3, verse 16. It says, "Don't you know that you yourself are God's temple, and that God's Spirit dwells in your midst?" See, the Apostle Paul shares with us that we are God's temple, and that we often miss the word that is the simple word of you, which is really your. It's in plural. It says the word you is referring to the whole body of Christ, meaning that you is not as an individual, but the entire church. See, the church is God's temple. It's where God's presence is. See, on a side note, it's amazing when you read about God's temple throughout the Bible. We see it from Genesis to Revelation. We pick up the theme. We see it in the Garden of Eden in the book of Genesis. And then we see the tabernacle. And then it goes to the temple. And then we see Jesus is our temple. And then it comes full circle that we see in Revelation that we are with God in paradise. See, the temple of God is where God is with his people. It's a place of worship and love. And we're going back to 1 Corinthians 3:16. It says, "You yourself are God's temple, and that your God's Spirit dwells within you." The question we need to ask ourselves is this: how can we, the body of believers, the church that God has called us to be, what does that look like? See, Paul is speaking to a group of Christ followers. He's speaking to the early church. In the early church, they loved God, yet they had their struggles to live out the gospel the way they were supposed to. And what I love about the Apostle Paul is that he doesn't mince words when he starts talking to the church of Corinth. Listen to what he says. He says, "Why is there so much division among you? Why are you fighting with one another? Why are you comparing yourself to one another? Why is there jealousy among your body?" He says, "Why are you worshiping other people instead of worshiping Jesus?" But here's the biggest one. He says, "Why are you acting like the people outside the church?" See, Paul is simply explaining that this is not how the church is supposed to be. This is not a good representation who Jesus Christ is. And these are all things that we shouldn't do, but they were doing it. They were acting and they were behaving in the wrong way. And we go back to 1 Corinthians 3:16. He says, "Don't you know that you yourself are God's temple, and that God's Spirit dwells in your midst?" And Paul is reminding them, the early church, and us today, that we are the body of Christ. We are God's image, and we should reflect Jesus. We are to act and behave just like we're representatives of Jesus. See, Jesus he was courageous, he was loving, he was gracious, he was generous, he was full of mercy, and most of all, he was full of love. And we need to remember that people outside the church, they're looking at us. And what are they seeing? See, God cares about how we speak to one another. God cares about how we act towards one another. God cares about how we manage our disagreements and how we reconcile with people. God cares about how, we just show love towards each other. So let us remember that we, the body of believers, the church, are the place where God's Spirit dwells in our midst. It's the church which God has chosen where we to worship him. And it's also the church where people can go and experience God. Well, thank you for joining with me for the verse of the day, and I hope to see you tomorrow. God bless.